2017 CF 15684, State v. Nelson. Back from our recess. Could counsel please approach?
Judge, we will be using the
Will be?
we will be using the screen.
Will be.
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen that are present in the gallery, some of you may not be familiar with court proceedings. In the Ninth Circuit, we have a courtroom decorum policy. You may not be aware of it unless you are familiar with court proceedings, practicing lawyer, or for some other reason just familiar with that policy. But there is a courtroom decorum policy. Part of the courtroom decorum policy requires that if people are in attendance during a court proceeding, that they not make noises or do anything else or say anything else that may distract the proceeding. I'm telling you this not because you've been distracting the proceeding or making noises. I'm telling you this because in a moment the court anticipates there's going to be evidence that is going to be put on the big screen that people present in the gallery will be able to see. If you do not believe that you can view what could be images that you are not used to seeing, then I would ask you to leave the courtroom. You do not have to leave the courtroom. I'm not ordering you to leave the courtroom. However, if it comes to the court's attention because I hear something or see something, or someone else present in the courtroom brings to my attention that they saw something or hear something that is a inappropriate noise, reaction, something that violates the courtroom decorum policy, then I will have to address it, and you may be removed from the courtroom and not allowed to return. So I tell you that because I don't know who's in the courtroom, who's familiar with the courtroom decorum policy, but I just wanted to advise you of that because of what the court anticipates will be shown on the screen. Mr. Nolly, is the state ready to bring the jury in?
The state is ready, Your Honor.
Ms. Simmons, is the defense ready?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Nelson, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, let's please bring in the jury. Mr. Nolly, does the state acknowledge the jury?
We do, Your Honor.
Ms. Simmons, defense.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Nelson.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, members of the jury, I apologize for the delay in bringing you back into the courtroom. Outside of your presence, the court admitted into evidence State's Exhibit 47, which I will read to you now. Stipulation of victim identification. The Assistant State Attorney, Linda Drain Burdick, and defendant Scott Edward Nelson, as well as his lawyer, Robert S. Lahr, stipulate that the identity of the deceased in this case is Jennifer Lynn Fulford. Mr. Nolly, please call the next witness for the state.
The state calls Joshua Stephany.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Sir, please state and spell your first and last name for Madam Court Reporter.
Joshua Stephany, Joshua Stephany.
Thank you. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, sir. Sir, what is your business or profession?
I am the Chief Medical Examiner for Orange and Osceola counties.
How long have you been the chief medical examiner for Orange and Osceola County?
About 3 years.
Tell us your educational background, sir.
4 years of undergraduate school, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of pathology residency, and 1 year of forensic pathology fellowship.
How long did all of that schooling take, doctor?
8. Let's see, 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, that's 8. 5 years of residency, 13. And then 1 year of forensic pathology fellowship.
14 years.
Yeah,
You are a medical doctor licensed in the state of Florida.
correct.
How long have you been a licensed medical practitioner, sir?
Since 2001.
How does one go about qualifying to be a medical examiner? What is the course of training that you go through?
Well, you get your medical degree, and then you have to do a pathology residency, which was 5 years, and then a forensic pathology fellowship, and then you have to take board certification exams. Board certification exams?
You mentioned a pathology residency and then a forensic pathology fellowship. Are there different kinds of pathology, sir?
Yes.
What are they?
Well, pathology itself is a study of disease. So anything that comes out of the body, biopsies, specimens, blood, all that goes to the lab, and that's what pathology is. They look for diseases or infections, things like that. The subcategories of pathology, such as surgical pathology, which looks at tissue under the slides of the microscope, specializes in tumors. I don't know what I said, but the surgical pathology is a specialty of studying, looking at slides under the microscope, so seeing if something's cancer or not cancer. There's cytology, which is looking at fluids. There's hematology, which is looking at blood. So there's multiple different subspecialties of pathology, all looking at disease processes.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology is the same as pathology. It's a subspecialty, but we take everything we learn in pathology and we go a step further, and we use those skills to determine cause and manner of death.
You are the chief medical examiner for Orange and Osceola County at this time.
Yes.
How were you employed before you became?
2017 CF 15684, State v. Nelson, back from our recess. Can counsel approach? Mr. Nunnally, is the state ready to proceed?
State ready, Judge.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes, Your
Mr. Nelson, you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Hicks?
Yes, Judge, before the jury is brought back in, we need to, the state has what's been previously marked for identification as State's Exhibit CE. This is a stipulation of victim identification. It reads, the Assistant State Attorney, Linda Drain Burdick, and Defendant Scott Edward Nelson, as well as his lawyer, Robert S. Lahr, stipulate that the identity of the deceased in this case is Jennifer Lynn Fulford, signed this 25th day of June, 2019. It's signed by Ms. Drain Burdick, Mr. Nelson, and Mr. Lahr. The state would move this into evidence as the next numbered exhibit, but the state would request that the court confirm with the defendant that he understands that he is stipulating to an element of the crime and that he did in fact sign this through counsel with his attorneys.
Is that labeled?
Yes.
Okay. Could you hand that to defense counsel so they can hand that to Mr. Nelson? What's that labeled, Ms. Hicks?
It's CE.
Charlie Edward?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Lahr, could you hand that to Mr. I'd like it to be in front of him, if you would. Thank you. All right, Mr. Nelson, do you have in front of you what should have on the back or on the front a yellow tag that has the letters CE on it? Okay. Turn that back over so you can actually read the document itself. Have you read that entire document?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Is that correct? Everything stated in that document, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that your signature on it?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to talk with your lawyers before you signed it?
Yes.
Okay. And you considered everything they said to you and you discussed with them before you signed it?
Yes.
Sure.
That's my signature. I understand the matter of the document I signed and I'm in agreement.
Okay. And do you understand that that stipulation, when we bring in the jury, is going to be read to the jury?
Yes.
Okay. And that's going to be admitted into evidence. You understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Hicks.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Hicks. All right, so without objection, what's been marked for identification as State CE is admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 47. All right, Mr. Nunnally, is the state ready to proceed?
State's ready, Your Honor.
Ms. Simmons, defense?
Your Honor, just one brief matter before we start. It came to my attention that during the bench conference, about the photos, and I would ask for an description about any audible or visible reactions to the testimony and the photos.
I'm not sure what you're asking for.
I'd ask for exit admonishments in the gallery or to anyone that they're, given the nature of the testimony that's coming up, that there not be any reaction to the jurors, to be able to see or hear.
Can counsel approach? Do counsel need to approach or?
Certainly.
Okay.
There's an issue.
Okay. All right, we're going to go into a brief recess. (2017) CF 15684, State v. Nelson. Back from our recess. Could counsel please approach?
Judge, we're ready. We will be using the,
Will be?
we will be using the screen.
Will be.
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen that are present in the gallery, some of you may not be familiar with court proceedings. In the Ninth Circuit, we have a courtroom decorum policy. You may not be aware of it unless you are familiar with court proceedings, practicing lawyer, or for some other reason just familiar with that policy. But there is a courtroom decorum policy. Part of the courtroom decorum policy requires that if people are in attendance during a court proceeding, that they not make noises or do anything else or say anything else that may distract the proceeding. I'm telling you this not because you've been distracting the proceeding or making noises. I'm telling you this because in a moment the court anticipates there's going to be evidence that is going to be put on the big screen that people present in the gallery will be able to see. If you do not believe that you can view what could be images that you are not used to seeing, then I would ask you to leave the courtroom. You do not have to leave the courtroom. I'm not ordering you to leave the courtroom. However, if it comes to the court's attention because I hear something or see something or someone else present in the courtroom brings to my attention that they saw something or hear something that is a inappropriate noise, reaction, something that violates the courtroom decorum policy, then I will have to address it, and you may be removed from the courtroom and not allowed to return. So I tell you that because I don't know who's in the courtroom, who's familiar with the courtroom decorum policy, but I just wanted to advise you of that because of what the court anticipates will be shown on the screen. Mr. Nolly, is the state ready to bring the jury in?
The state is ready, Your Honor.
Ms. Simmons, is the defense ready?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Nelson, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, let's please bring in the jury. Mr. Nolly, does the state acknowledge the jury?
We do, Your Honor.
Ms. Simmons, defense.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Nelson.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, members of the jury, I apologize for the delay in bringing you back into the courtroom. Outside of your presence, the court admitted into evidence State's Exhibit 47, which I will read to you now. Stipulation of victim identification. The Assistant State Attorney, Linda Drain Burdick, and Defendant Scott Edward Nelson, as well as his lawyer, Robert S. Lahr, stipulate that the identity of the deceased in this case is Jennifer Lynn Fulford. Mr. Nolly, please call the next witness for the state.
The state calls Joshua Stephany.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Sir, please state and spell your first and last name for Madam Court Reporter.
Joshua Stephany, Joshua, Stephany.
Thank you. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, sir. Sir, what is your business or profession?
I am the Chief Medical Examiner for Orange and Osceola counties.
How long have you been the chief medical examiner for Orange and Osceola County?
About 3 years.
Tell us your educational background, sir.
4 years of undergraduate school, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of pathology residency, and 1 year of forensic pathology fellowship.
How long did all of that schooling take, doctor?
4, 8, let's see, 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, that's 8. 5 years of residency, 13. And then 1 year of forensic pathology fellowship.
14 years.
Yeah.
You are a medical doctor licensed in the state of Florida.
Correct.
How long have you been a licensed medical practitioner, sir?
Since 2001.
How does one go about qualifying to be a medical examiner? What is the course of training that you go through?
Well, you get your medical degree, and then you have to do a pathology residency, which was 5 years, and then a forensic pathology fellowship, and then you have to take board certification exams. Board certification exams?
You mentioned a pathology residency and then a forensic pathology fellowship. Are there different kinds of pathology, sir?
Yes.
What are they?
Well, pathology itself is a study of disease. So anything that comes out of the body, biopsies, specimens, blood, all that goes to the lab, and that's what pathology is. They look for diseases or infections, things like that. The subcategories of pathology, such as surgical pathology, which looks at tissue under the slides of the microscope, specializes in tumors. I don't know what I said, but the surgical pathology is a specialty of looking at slides under the microscope, so seeing if something's cancer or not cancer. There's cytology, which is looking at fluids. There's hematology, which is looking at blood. So there's multiple different subspecialties of pathology, all looking at disease processes.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology is the same as pathology. It's a subspecialty, but we take everything we learn in pathology and we go a step further, and we use those skills to determine cause and manner of death.
You are the chief medical examiner for Orange and Osceola County at this time.
Yes.
How were you employed before you became?
Else?
Elevators aren't running yet. The elevators up and running yet.
They are not?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have an ETA on that?
That's what I'm trying to find out now.
One moment, members of the jury. I thought all systems were functioning, but apparently the elevators are still not functioning. Council approach. Mr. Nelson? All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am monitoring the communication. As soon as I'm informed that the elevators are working, then we're going to break and we'll take our lunch. But right now, although the power has been restored, apparently the elevators are still not functioning. So we're going to proceed until we get notification that the elevators are working. Mr. Nunnally, please continue.
Thank you, Honor. Dr. Stephany, I believe the last thing I asked you was, or started to ask you, was how were you employed before becoming the chief medical examiner for Orange and Osceola counties?
I was an associate medical examiner for Orange and Osceola counties
How long did you hold that position?
since July 2007.
Prior to July 2007, how were you employed?
I was a forensic fellow at Miami-Dade County. Fellow at Miami-Dade County.
What does that entail, doctor?
It's basically the same job I do now. It's just last year of training.
Okay. What are the duties and responsibilities of the medical examiner's office, sir?
Well, the bottom line for us is to determine the cause and manner of death.
As the chief medical examiner for Orange and Osceola counties, are you responsible for overseeing the operations of the medical examiner's office?
Correct.
how many postmortem examinations or autopsies have you conducted yourself, Dr. Stephany?
Over 3,000.
And is it fair to say that the objective of an autopsy performed by a forensic pathologist such as yourself is to determine the cause and manner of death of an individual?
Yes.
And what is the cause of death to a forensic pathologist? What does that mean to you?
Well, the cause of death can be almost anything. What a cause of death is whatever happens to someone that starts a chain of events that leads to their death.
And what does the manner of death mean to you?
The manner of death, there's only 5 possibilities: natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined.
Your Honor, at this point, I would tender the witness for voir dire.
Ms. Simmons? You may proceed.
Dr. Stephany, did you have occasion as a medical examiner in Orange County to perform an autopsy on the body of an individual identified to you as Jennifer Fulford?
Yes.
When did you do that autopsy, sir?
October 1st, 2017.
What is the general practice that you follow as a forensic pathologist when a body comes into you for autopsy? What do you do first?
Well, when someone's brought into our office, the whole point of what we do is to examine them. So when they come in, we examine them externally as they come in, whether they're clothed or if they come in from a hospital, if they have medical intervention. So we examine them, take pictures, document with our notes what our examination is externally. That might also include pictures. Once that's complete, we will clean them up. If they have blood or dirt or medical intervention, we'll take that off. Again, we'll document the external examination with our notes or pictures, making note of any injuries or natural disease processes. Once that part's complete, we'll look at the individuals internally, what we call in situ, meaning we'll look at the organs inside the individual, again, making note of any natural disease processes or injuries. Once that part's complete, we'll take the organs out and look at each organ individually, again, looking for any natural disease processes or injuries.
What did you observe when you first received the body of Jennifer Fulford?
Well, she was received to our office clothed, so we document that she had clothing on. She was also bound, meaning both her wrists and ankles were bound together. She had duct tape around part of her head, and I could see defects in her top, and beneath that were defects in her chest.
And when you say you saw defects in her top, what do you mean, doctor? What do you mean by that?
Well, by defects, we mean holes.
In her clothes?
Correct.
I may approach a witness, Your Honor.
Yes.
Dr. Stephany, I'm showing you what are marked for identification as State's Exhibit AY and State's Exhibit CD. Without showing those photographs to the jury, would you take a look at those photographs and tell me if you can tell what they are?
Yes.
Do those truly and accurately depict the material shown therein?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point, I would offer AY and CD in your evidence as the next consecutive number.
Ms. Simmons?
We would renew our previous objections and stipulations.
All right, so the court overrules the objections to the extent previously discussed. So the AY will be admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 48, and CD will be admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 49.
Permission to publish, Your Honor.
Granted.
Doctor, I'm showing you what is in evidence as State's Exhibit 49. I ask if you can tell me what that photograph shows.
That shows the decedent's wrists, and they were bound by a white zip tie.
Doctor, let me get you a laser pointer that might be able to help you out with that.
I have one.
You got a laser pointer, Doctor?
Yes.
I'm learning how to drive this thing, so here we go. What do you observe of significance to you in this photograph?
Well, first of all, these are the decedent's wrists. They're behind her back. This white thing around her wrist is bounding her wrist. That's a zip tie.
And Doctor, now I'm showing you what is in evidence as State's Exhibit 48. What does that depict?
That looks like the back of the decedent's right wrist, and what you can see here, that area of blanching is where the zip tie was. And if you look really close, it's hard to see on the screen, there's little parallel striations that were caused by the zip tie.
What is the significance of the parallel striations to you as a forensic pathologist?
Well, really, it just shows that the zip tie was there. It just confirms it. If we didn't have it on her originally, we could use those striations to match it. You could use it to show the extent of how tight it was around an individual, meaning how hard pressed it was against someone's skin.
I may approach counsel for a moment, Your Honor.
Yeah. Mr. Nunnally is, I can't see I smell smoke. Is there?
Your Honor.
It's not coming from the device or the Elmo or anything? Okay.
Sir, no, he came up the stairs.
Facilities to see if we're not getting any reports of a fire or anything like that, but we reported at facilities, so hopefully they can isolate the issue. All right, Mr. Nunnally?
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Dr. Stephany, I'm showing you a series of photographs marked for identification as State's Exhibit CC, AB, BB, CA, BC, BD, and BF. Without showing those photographs to the jury yet, let me get you to take a look at those pictures and tell me if you identify that. Can I identify that?
Yes.
Do you recognize those photographs?
Yes.
What are they?
They're pictures taken at the scene and during the autopsy.
Do those photographs truly and accurately reflect what is depicted therein?
Yes.
This time, Your Honor, we would offer States BF, BD, BC, CA, CC, AV, and BB into evidence at the next executive motion.
Ms. Simmons? All right. To the extent that there was not an agreement or stipulation of the parties, the objections are overruled, and the exhibits will be admitted in the numbering order determined by the clerk, starting with State's Exhibit 50.
BB is 50. AV is 51. CC is 52. BF is 53. PD is 54. BC is 55. And CA is 56.
Once again, Your Honor.
Yes.
Dr. Stephany, I'm putting what's in evidence, the state's exhibit 49 back up to this moment. In addition to the zip tie around Ms. Fulford's wrist, what else is depicted within that photograph?
Well, she's got jewelry on her wrist as well. It's actually upside down. This is the top. There's maggots or fly larvae infestation here. Right here. And you see just some post-mortem reaction. There's bloating and color discoloration of the individual.
It appears that she has a wedding band, a watch, and a bracelet or maybe two on.
That's correct.
Dr. Stephany, in addition to the zip ties that you observed on the victim's wrists, was she restrained in any other fashion?
She had duct tape around her ankles.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you what is in evidence that states exhibit 52 for identification. What is depicted in that photograph, sir?
This picture was taken at the scene. These are her feet. These are her ankles. And around the ankles is gray duct tape.
Was she duct taped in any other fashion, doctor?
She had duct tape around her head, completely covering her eyes, nose, and mouth.
Doctor, I'm showing you what's in evidence, as exhibit 51. What does that photograph depict?
This is the scene at our office. She's been removed from the scene. She currently, in this picture, is on her stomach, so you're looking at the back of her. What you see is the duct tape around her head, as well as her shirt, and then there's two defects in the shirt.
And the defect is a hole, right, doctor?
Correct.
Now, doctor, I'm showing you what is in evidence as states exhibit 56. What is depicted in that photograph, sir?
This is, again, at our office. She's on her back. You see the gray duct tape wrapped around her head, covering her eyes, nose, and mouth. You can see a couple defects on the front of the shirt. Again, the defects are holes. In those two areas I just circled.
Doctor, did you, after you see the victim, Ms. Fulford, like this, what did you do next?
I don't remember exactly what I did next, but in these cases we take pictures, we document what we find, and then we will remove the clothing, remove the restraints, and take more pictures.
Did you remove the duct tape from the victim's face?
Yes.
Approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you what is in evidence of states exhibit 54. What does that photograph depict, sir?
That shows us the duct tape still partially attached, but it's been partially removed. So you see that white area on her head is exactly where the duct tape was covering.
How far up and down on the victim's face was the duct tape, doctor?
Well, in this picture, you can clearly see where it was and wasn't. There's a clear line of demarcation between the dark area and the lighter area the duct tape was covering. This is showing the right side of her head, so that's her right ear. But on the face, it was covering her eyes, nose, and mouth.
Did it go down below her mouth to her chin, doctor?
Yes.
Doctor, after you removed the duct tape and removed the victim's clothing, what other injuries did you find on Mrs. Fulford?
Stab wounds?
Where were those stab wounds located, doctor?
There were 4 stab wounds in the chest, 1 in the abdomen, and 2 in the back.
Doctor, I'm showing you what is in evidence as State's Exhibit 50. What does this photograph show?
This is the decedent's back. What you're seeing here is a lot of post-mortem sloughing of skin or predation. But here are the 2 defects that we spoke about earlier, and again, defects are holes. In this case, they're stab wounds. So there's one right there, and there's another one right there.
How deep were those stab wounds, doctor? The ones in Miss Fulford's back?
I don't measure them. I only tell you what they penetrated. In this case, they only penetrated the muscle of the back.
Would the 2 stab wounds to Mrs. Fulford's back have been fatal to her?
In and of themselves, I don't believe so, no.
Would they have been painful to her?
I believe they would have.
Overruled.
Doctor, you also said that Mrs. Fulford had 4 stab wounds, 2 for the chest and 1 to her abdomen. I'm showing you what is in evidence in State's Exhibit 55. What does that photograph show, sir?
These are 5 stab wounds, 4 to the chest, 1 to the abdomen, and I'll try to circle them for you.
Okay.
There's one. There's one. There's one. There's one. And those are the 4 in the chest, and this is the one on the abdomen.
Just for the record, doctor, the one in the abdomen is the lowest stab wound when the photograph is oriented correctly top to bottom, right?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not any of the stab wounds depicted in State's Exhibit 55 would have been fatal to Mrs. Fulford?
Yes.
What is that opinion, doctor?
3 of the stab wounds in the chest, 1 hit the heart itself, 1 hit the pulmonary artery, which is the major artery that goes to your lungs, supplies the blood to your lungs, and 1 hits the left upper lung lobe. And then the stab wound in the abdomen, the lowest one, strikes the liver.
Sorry, strikes the what?
Liver.
What would be the physiological effect, or let me ask it this way. What would be the result of those wounds being inflicted on a person?
Well, the stab wound to the pulmonary artery, again, which is a major artery going to the lungs, if you're stabbed in that, you can bleed out. The stab wound going to the heart, again, you will bleed out. The stab wound going to the left upper lung lobe, you will bleed from that as left upper lung lobe, you will bleed out as well as causing a pneumothorax, meaning your lung may collapse. The stab wound going to the liver, again, you will bleed from.
Doctor, you used the phrase bleed out. What does that mean?
Well, it means you'll bleed. The heart is a pump, so as long as it's pumping and causing pressure, the blood will bleed out of whatever is struck by a sharp object.
Would that be uncontrolled bleeding?
Yes.
You used the phrase, I believe, a hemothorax. Is that what you said?
Pneumothorax.
Pneumothorax. Okay. What is a pneumothorax first?
This one, something penetrates into the lung cavity, causing negative pressure, which can cause your lung to collapse.
What would be the effect of that if untreated?
It will inhibit your breathing or make it very hard to breathe.
Doctor, do you have a judgment as to how much blood would be produced by these wounds?
I don't. It would depend on someone's heartbeat. The faster your heart is beating, the more blood you lose at a quicker rate. It would depend on how big the holes are. Typical human being has about 5 liters of blood. When about 20% is lost, you'll lose consciousness. And when about 40% is lost, it'll be fatal.
Mr. Null, I'm sorry to interrupt. The fire department needs to come in and check around. Deputy.
Courtroom?
You can't go off the record yet. Okay. Hold on one second. There's the fire department. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess in just a moment. You're going to leave your notepads and your pens here. Again, you're under all the court's instructions, including but not limited to the instruction not to discuss this case amongst yourselves with anyone else. Please follow the deputy into the jury room. We'll bring you back as quickly as we can. Thank you. All right, OFD, welcome. Do whatever it is you need to do.
The smell was primarily back over here? There, okay.
I'm not sure of the source. Various people noticed it at various locations in the courtroom.
Nothing back there?
State, okay to go off the record? Yes. Defense, okay to go off the record? Yes. All right, well, we're off the record. All right, we're going to take a brief recess, so if anybody needs to take a break, this would be a good time. I'm going to see what I can find out about the elevators, if anything. 2017 CF 15684, State v. Nelson, back from our recess. Mr. Nonnelly, is the state ready to proceed?
We are ready.
Ms. Simmons, defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson, you ready? All right, let's please bring in the jury. Mr. Nonnelly, does the state acknowledge the jury?
You do, Your Honor.
Ms. Simmons, defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson? All right, members of the jury, tried to obtain information, was unable to find that anything has changed. People are looking at it. Facilities is involved, the sheriff's office is involved, court admin is involved. No change as far as we know. We're on limited generator power, but the elevators still are not working. So again, I'll keep you updated as soon as anything changes in that regard. Mr. Nunnally.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Stephany, we were talking before the fire department got here about blood having been produced by the wounds sustained by Mrs. Fulford. Do you recall this?
Yes.
Now, did the stab wounds that Mrs. Fulford sustained result in blood that was spurting to the outside, or was she bleeding internally?
It probably would have been both. Because of the state she was found in, and meaning she was partially decomposed, we didn't recover any blood inside of her because it had already either leaked out or disintegrated.
So it was impossible to tell.
Correct.
And can you determine, based upon your examination, the angle of some or all of the entry wounds? In other words, were they 90-degree angles, or were they somewhat off-center at an angle left or right? Did you prepare a report, Dr. Stephany?
Yes.
Would reviewing the report refresh your recollection as to the angle of the entry wounds?
Yes.
Do you have that report available to review?
Yes.
And have you reviewed it?
Yes.
And having done so, is your memory refreshed?
Not completely, yeah. I'm still reviewing it.
Okay. Let me know when you're done, sir.
I don't make note of any angles or directions. All I do is note of what the stab wound penetrates.
Now, doctor, we have covered the stab wounds that Mrs. Fulford sustained. Let's move to the duct tape that was around her face. I believe you testified that the duct tape covered her face from above her eyes to below her chin. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Can you describe for the members of the jury how tightly wrapped that duct tape was around Mrs. Fulford's face?
Well, I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I mean, it was tight enough to cover her nose, her mouth, her eyes. Once you removed it, you could see how it had pressed the ears and the nose towards the face and the head. It's really hard for me to actually answer how tight it was. I mean, it was tight enough to push her ears and nose to her face.
Was it tight enough to affect her ability to breathe?
I believe so, yes.
Can you quantify how much of an airway obstruction she would have had as a result of having duct tape wrapped around her mouth and nose?
I believe it would have been complete external airway obstruction, meaning it completely blocked her nose and mouth.
And I know it may sound like an obvious question, but when one's mouth and nose is completely blocked, what is the effect on that individual?
She won't be able to breathe. She won't be able to take in any air or oxygen.
Again, I know it's a keenly obvious question, but if she can't take in any oxygen, what's going to happen?
Well, you'll asphyxiate.
And how long would it take to for a person to asphyxiate?
It would depend on the individual. The average individual, probably less than a few minutes.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you what is in evidence, the State's Exhibit 53. You would take a look at that photograph and tell us what it is.
That is a picture of the decedent. Her head, the duct tape has been removed. You see her face. So basically everything that is that white or lighter color is where the duct tape was. So you see a nice line of demarcation here where the top of the duct tape was, and then it extended all the way down, covering the eyes, nose, mouth, chin to below the chin.
Doctor, based upon your work in this case, were you able to come to a conclusion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to Jennifer Fulford's cause of death?
Yes.
What is it, sir?
Stab wounds and asphyxiation.
And when you say asphyxiation, what's a lay term for that?
A lay term could be suffocation.
Can you tell, based upon medical findings that you were able to make in this case, whether Mrs. Fulford died of asphyxiation as opposed to from the stab wounds?
I cannot.
Why not?
Well, the only real evidence we have of asphyxiation is the duct tape around her nose and mouth. There is no real autopsy findings that we can specifically say it was a suffocation or asphyxia.
In turning to the stab wounds that Mrs. Fulford sustained, were those pre-mortem wounds?
I believe so, yes.
Why do you say that, doctor?
There's certain things we can look for, what we call vital reaction around the actual wounds themselves. You don't really see it on the skin surface because of the decomposition. We just don't see it. But when we looked further deeper into deeper tissue, we saw areas of hemorrhage in the soft tissue or the muscle or the organs around where the stab wounds were.
Can you tell, based upon your work in this case, whether the duct tape was wrapped around Mrs. Fulford's face and head before or after she was stabbed?
I cannot.
Why not?
There's really just no, for me, there's no scientific way for me to do that.
Doctor, also based upon your work in this case, can you determine the order in which the 7 stab wounds suffered by Mrs. Fulford were sustained?
I cannot.
Why not?
Again, there's no real scientific way for me to determine that based on autopsy alone.
approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you what has been marked for identification as State's Exhibit T. Take a look at that document, that envelope, sir, and tell me if you can identify it.
I can't identify it as one of ours, but I can read the label.
You would go ahead and open it, sir. There's some gloves right here if you want. Can you now identify what is contained within State's Exhibit T for identification?
Yes.
What is State's Exhibit T for identification?
It's a smaller manila envelope with my label on it and my signature. And inside that smaller manila envelope is a DNA card.
And who was this DNA card collected from, sir?
Miss Fulford,
Who was it collected by?
myself.
What did you do with the DNA card after you collected it, sir?
We take it, label it, seal it, and then law enforcement will pick it up.
Thank you, sir. Do you recall exactly who you handed it over to?
I didn't release it. One of my investigators did.
I may approach the witness again, Your Honor.
Yes.
Judge, we would offer, State's Exhibit T for identification ends the next consecutive vote.
Ms. Simmons? All right, well, that objection must have been marked for identification as State's Exhibit T is admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit, is that 57? State's Exhibit 57. Actually, Mr. Nally, one moment. Members of the jury, I've received some additional information. I need to verify some things, so we're going to take a recess here in just a moment. You're going to leave your notepads and your pens here. During the recess, you're under all the court's instructions, including but not limited to the instruction not to discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Please follow the deputy in the jury room. We'll bring you back as quickly as we can. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a brief recess.